You know, it's quite amazing. There's all this hype and talk about AI and AI this and AI that, when in fact, the most powerful AI, if you will, is over here in our heads. But we don't talk about it as much. And the question is, why? What is up, YouTube? We're going to spend a little time talking about how you can leverage your mind and apply, I guess, the AI hype, since there's so much interest in it, into how you can leverage your mind to actually make better, higher fidelity decisions in your life. As we know, AI works by feeding it a lot of data. The saying goes that if you trust the AI, you are actually saying that you trust the data. And the data, the best data is the highest quality data, but then you also need some volume of data, and you feed it into multiple layers of what they call neural networks, and they kind of do their thing, and they have different ways of quote unquote teaching the model, from GAN-based teaching and all the way up now to where you can actually copy the models, and they call them foundational models that you can replicate and kind of build off them. And that today is the world we live in something called large language models, which is ChatGPT. And the latest version of ChatGPT 4.0 takes not just language and text, but multiple modes, if you will. So it's multiple modal, and takes in images and video and so on and so forth, audio as well, and kind of applies the same process to it to generate AI content. Here's the thing, our minds work in very similar ways. That's why there's no surprise that it's called the neural network, because it was modeled after some of the learnings of how our brain operates. And much like a child, and I've got two children now, one 2, one 6 years old, one about to turn 2. I can actually, it's kind of funny, right? I can see how they're learning and how it's kind of like some of the models I trained when I dabbled into AI. And the similarities are there, right? You see the model and the child getting smarter and smarter. But here's the thing, it really depends on what data you feed it and then the training that you give it. You know, what boggles my mind is we pay so much attention into how we raise our kids, what we allow them to see. PG-13, PG, R, these ratings for just in entertainment and movies calibrate like the kind of information we let our children see. And the reason why we don't let them see everything all at once is because, well, they haven't been trained to understand what is good, what is not good, and how to digest and process the information. And so there's like this step-by-step way of doing it where we give it some data. Okay, I shouldn't say it. Well, we give our children some data. We kind of educate them on what's good about and what's bad about the information. And then, it's this side-by-side step of growing, and we're very much in control in saying what's good and what's not good, right? And so that's the way we rear our kids. Whereas, in AI, with this crazy hype and rush to cash and get rich and be the one, and ego driven, right? It's completely ego driven. What we do is we just blast it with as much data. I mean, let's just take the entire internet, all of Reddit, and it's all the sarcasm and cynicism in all the different social networks. Let's just suck all that data and then apply it, and ask it to figure it out, right? All at once. And so, well, you end up with what we see today, right? There's been a lot of crazy missteps, like Google's AI showing, like, with regards to race and the whole wokeism, all the problems they've had, and the torching they've gotten from the public, right? Because of their shortcomings, and even ChatGPT and all the hallucinations that we talk about. Well, that's just a product of the way we've been doing it, right? And supposedly these AI models and engines are going to change the world and going to, impact every single one of our lives. Yet we don't apply anywhere near the stringent way of rearing our children to develop their intelligence to these models, right? And so it just boggles my mind. Like, how do we expect these things to actually, have any form of ethics or anything when we completely just blasted with all the good and a lot of the negative stuff on the internet, more than half of which is just insidious, and expect it to be something better than it? Well, it won't, folks. It simply won't. Let's talk a little bit how our minds operate, right? First, there's a lot of information, the data that comes into our brain, basically through our bodies, right? And what we do with that information, it's all kinds of information. It's sound, it's touch, things that we don't feed AI yet, right? These things come into our body and are thrown into our brains, basically, for processing. And what happens from that information is, over time, we create knowledge. This is the rearing and teaching that I was talking about, how we raise our children. And from that knowledge, eventually comes over time something called experience. And that's just over time you try a bunch of different things and you learn through the experience what the knowledge and how it can be applied and how it shouldn't be applied based on our culture, our understanding, and it's all molded into who we are as we turn into teenagers and eventually adults. And then from there, we take the experience and we put it together in a higher meta level called strategy. And, that's why we have strategy strategists and people who think through, ahead of the game, what may happen and piece together a path forward, even though they don't see the path forward, they see it in their brains from the knowledge, the experience that they gathered from the information. And finally, there's this more esoteric meta layer of basically thinking, which is called intuition. And this one is not necessarily well understood because it involves a certain level of feeling, if you will, an emotive component to the decision making. And I'm not talking about the amygdala and fight or flight and the way emotions impact the way we make decisions based on, a serious situation like the way we evolved from cavemen. We'd see a saber-toothed tiger or a mammoth, we'd have the amygdala activate and it would give us a fight or flight decision making. No, I'm not talking about that type of emotion. It's more of like what we call the gut feel that we have when we're faced with a certain decision. Our intuition is signaling something, and that's not something, because it's at a meta level, that we can necessarily trace back to exactly why we want to make that decision or we feel a certain way about a decision. But nevertheless, that signal comes into our head. And so that would be the highest level of decision making that we know of, and also that we can't fully explain. Now, our intuition is the most advanced form of decision making. And even though we can't technically explain how our intuition works, and because we can't explain it, some people just write it off as woo-woo, it's black magic, mystical, hocus pocus stuff. And again, one of FoFty's principles is to use science as a validator, but not use it to limit what may be possible, right? What may be possible should be kept open, because otherwise dark energy, dark matter, we can't explain it, right? So we have to use our imagination to come up with theories to then use science to validate. So validation, yes, science, but to limit our exploration and creativity, definitely not. And so as a result, because we can't really explain intuition, it's kind of, they talk about black box and AI. We don't know how the AI model works. We trained it, but we don't know how it works. It's a similar thing. We don't really know how our intuition works. It's kind of a black box. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist and that it has value, just because we can't measure it with science yet. And so you have to keep your minds open, but understand that when you have an intuitive decision-making signal sent to you, that it has a lot of value and is in fact the most advanced form of thinking and decision-making that we as humans have. And it's much more powerful than any AI that exists out today and exists in the near future at least, because it sidesteps and it jumps the gun on a decision that normally, if you follow the serial process of decision making, would take a much longer time and eventually not even lead to as good a decision. Intuition is a very powerful tool when used correctly. But the problem is, if you use it in the wrong place, it could actually be terrible because it's so powerful. It could just go completely the other way in a bad way. So where is the right place to use it and where isn't the right place to use it? Well, the most important determining factor and what you should understand on when to use intuition is in areas where you have a lot of experience in. Let's say you spent many years or even decades in a certain or particular field. Let's say that would be in web design and programming, or even in investing in the stock market or whatnot. Well, over that time, you've accumulated a lot of domain-centric information. And from that information, you've created knowledge from that. And from that knowledge, you've gained a lot of experience over that long amount of time. And experiences then led to strategies on how to deploy your actions. And some of them failed and some of them worked. And over time, there's a lot of this learning that you've developed in the real world, taking in a lot of dynamic, not static. So this is not AI, which takes a snapshot of everything and then learns from it. And then they have to take another snapshot and learn from it, which is why I see GPT always has like an as of date of when it was created. No, this is completely dynamic information that's evolving as you're learning, as you're gaining experience, as you're trying and failing and succeeding. All of this very complex dynamic learning is taking place in a specific domain from which you develop an intuition. And it is in those cases where you should absolutely use your intuition. And there have been studies with this, right? Where people who have spent a lot of time in a particular area of a domain or expertise have been given like tests to see how quickly they can make a decision, whether that decision is right or wrong. And one of the tests I remember reading about is a study where, with regards to fake handbags, right? I don't know why they chose that topic, but it's an interesting one, right? So there was a control group of some people who weren't experts at handbags and didn't know all the ins and outs and nuances of every small particular detail. And then another group of people who were experts in this, either because they were validators or were involved in the manufacturing of the handbags themselves. When these two different groups of people were given handbags and asked a question to determine whether or not it was a fake or if it was a real handbag, what they found out over repetitive studies was that the people who were experts, meaning they had domain expertise, lots of experience over many years, they would be able to make a high fidelity, high predictability, correct score quickly. They would be able to quickly tell whether a handbag's real or fake. This is like with sneakers, right? You see all the in the sneaker shows, the people who go to people to ask them whether or not it's a Fugazi or if it's real. It's the same thing, right? They can tell through intuition very quickly whether or not it's real or if it's fake, whereas people with less experience would look at the handbag for a long time and try to figure out whether it's not, and even spending a lot of time wouldn't be able to determine, and they have no intuition to rely on except out of their emotion, which is not, as I said earlier, what intuition actually is. And so that is unexpected outcome, right? People with intuition in a specific domain, fine, they use it, they make the right call pretty quickly. What was interesting was when the people with a lot of experience actually spent more time to analyze the handbag, it actually resulted in lower quality and more false positives. Meaning, the longer you spend thinking about something in an area where you have domain expertise and not relying on your intuition, the lower the quality of decision you ultimately make. So the bottom line is, look, understand where you have experience, knowledge, strategy, and intuition, and use your intuition. Don't get stuck in analysis paralysis in these areas of expertise. Go with your, if you want to call it, gut, because that will eventually lead to the best outcome and the highest quality decision that you can make. Now, on the flip side, there's the place where you apply what you perceive to be intuition in the wrong place, and you're going now by emotion and gut in an area where you don't have much domain expertise. And the best example of this is the story with Steve Jobs, who was so infatuated with the Segway. If you remember the Segway, they still are around, like you see in the airports and in tourist joints. But the two-wheel device, the gyroscopic two-wheel traveling device that was supposed to change the world, right, enamored so many people. It was like Theranos, like all these who's who were so into the whole Segway thing, and they were investing in it. They wanted to buy the company. Steve Jobs was one of them. He wanted to spend all his money and buy the company and basically just get involved with it because he was infatuated with the thing. But it was outside of his domain of expertise, right? It wasn't anything to do with computers, technology, interfaces with a device, and anything to that. It had some user interface, user UX type of thing, but it was limited on the fringes. And that was a clear case of misguided intuition placed into something where it was outside of the domain. And obviously, Segway didn't live up to the thing that it was supposed to be, which was to change the way humanity traveled on this planet. You can apply your intuition to obvious areas, right? At work, you're doing something very specific. That's something that has to do with a knowledge or expertise within your domain. Yes, apply your intuition. You'll get more proficient, more high fidelity decisions that you'll make, which ultimately over time will lead to better career trajectories and outcomes. You can also apply to areas outside of your work, such as family and friends and society and culture and even spiritual. Again, as long as you've kind of amassed a lot of information, got the knowledge, then had the strategy and ultimately the intuition from the experiences you had over a length of time. The key component here is to know where to apply it and not to overthink things. So no matter what you're going through in life, whether it be at your work, whether it be at home, at family, whether it be with yourself, with your spirituality, whatever it is, if it's an area where you've gathered enough information, garnered enough knowledge, had experience through it for an amount of time that is sufficient and material, created strategies, and now have intuition, you should just use your intuition, because it is a lot faster and better quality decision-making capability you will have than following the serial, process, which is very, if you want to call it computerized and step one, step two, step three type of way of decision making. Those will take a long time and won't be as good in the end. And so that's my message to all of you watching today. Understand what intuition is, understand where and how to use it, and don't get bogged down by analysis paralysis. Having said that, I'll see you in the next episode. Peace.